All right, gentlemen. Think we're good. Welcome to the We Are CC podcast. This is episode number unknown. Maybe I can edit that later to add it in. So for those who download the episodes off of any podcast site, download it off of Buzzsprout or anything like that, we are catching up on the episodes. You know, this tends to happen in a bear market. You know, I was talking to Mister about this at the beginning. If you haven't made it, you got to fall back to the things that make you money. And the team, all of us, obviously have jobs, have lives outside of this. Oh, there's some feedback. But you know, it's an unpaid gig, and so we're just a little bit strapped for support. So if there's any audio, video experts out there that would like to help us manage this on behalf of RCC, you know, hit me up. Might be some moons in it for you, or if you prefer some other type of tips, I do have at least a moderate amount of bananas, of Doge, of moons, and then, you know, other stuff. But anyways, let's kick it off, gents. So oh, we're getting the feedback. Getting it again, hearing myself.
See, I've turned down my sensitivity a good deal.
Yeah, no worries. Or maybe use headphones or something, I'm not sure. So this week, we always lead off with Bitcoin. I know from last week, you know, one of the things we were talking about is how we're not, I think almost all of us, maybe was it you, Mister? One of us was the holdout, but the rest of us were like, yeah, we don't feel too bad about where things are.
No. I was the bear.
Yeah, you know.
Yeah, I think Jared, we're still getting that feedback, man.
I'm sorry. I'm not sure where it's where we're getting it. Let me try to mute this side. And all right, go ahead, because I've muted myself on Discord.
Yeah, while he's doing that, you know, I think the outlier was, you know, there's all the TA that we can do, right? But then the outlier in the TA models was Jerome Powell, right? And I think that proved to be a bit more of a headwind than perhaps, you know, anybody was expecting. You know, as usual, he's very, very couched in the words that he uses, right? Just so he doesn't tip off the market in too many different ways. And despite that, though, you know, he did use pain. He said pain 2 or 3 times, right? And I think that was just a little bit too spooky for investors. And we did see that volatility kick in over the weekend, which, you know, leaves us where we are now. But, you know, it's good to see a little bit of a recovery on a Monday. We've seen volume starting to kick back in a little bit. But yeah, it's starting to look a little bit better. Not saying we're out of the woods, but what do you guys think?
You know, honestly, I'm still not terribly concerned. I think we said a while back that we were looking for a range between the upper teens and, say, just around 30K. The you know, even in a best case scenario, is probably the range we would be exploring. We have that gap in between, say, 30K and the mid 20s that we still haven't quite penetrated. But we also have strong demand in the upper teens, which is now going to be tested, like we're seeing now. And I'll be curious, you know, if we do hold, let's say, at least over 17K, I feel pretty good that we'll continue to explore that range.
I'm keeping more of my bear attitude, especially with seeing things like the dollar being at a 20-year high. I don't think it's necessarily that the dollar is doing so great. It's just other relative currencies are doing poorer, and it's seen as, you know, the most reliable of bad options. Mm-hmm. And so, and like geopolitically, the way things are going, stuff like that, the instability, uncertainty, all these supply chain issues, and just across the board, I'm personally, and you're seeing really big institutions coming out and saying, like, buckle up for hard times, you know, and these are the people with the greatest amounts of interest in accurately predicting what's going to happen. And so I'm personally taking heed of that, and I'm staying. I think we're, you know, I think it's more of a, unfortunately, a bearish future.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
the TA does back it up now, right? Because one thing that I think some folks, at least, good amount of folks were hoping for was to kind of turn a key support turned resistance back into support level. I think that was like 21.2, 21.3, somewhere around there. And we just had to close the week above that. And all hopes were that we'd climb up through the weekend to close above that point, but obviously couldn't do that after Jackson Hole, right? And so now we've confirmed on the weekly chart that 21 that trend line as resistance now. It is now confirmed as resistance on the weekly chart. So yeah, I'm probably more on your side, Jared. For me, I think I'm yeah, I'm a little bit of the skeptic, but also I always try to keep a little bit of that optimism alive. I think that's just kind of how you got to do in crypto, right? You just have to keep believing. You have to have that optimism, but you can't let that detract from staying objective, right? Looking at the data and just making the non-emotional calls. And I think that really, for me, is not emotionally, I think, a little bit on the bear side as well.
And I'm totally with you on that. You've got to keep your passion and your optimism alive for things. And for me, it's just calling if for I'm not saying it is, but that's what I see. It's a bear, and calling it that, acting accordingly. It's a different kind of opportunity and a different kind of strategy. It's like it doesn't take my enthusiasm out at all. And I've been through several bear and bull cycles, and so the bull, it's just okay. If that's the world we're in, then it's just a different strategy. It's like, okay, I focus on building right now, focus on building more. And whether that's depending on where you're at, maybe it is like Poppy said, you focus on your practical non-crypto job, or whatever that is, your primary means of income. And then keep an eye on the markets, and you can maybe clean up your books, clean up your if you've got a bunch of different spread out coins and things like that, and you want to like go in and consolidate, or if you've been consolidating and want to go in and kind of diversify and explore some other options, not a bad time for that. And so yeah, for me, like a bear doesn't take away my enthusiasm for a moment. It's a different strategy. And for me personally, where I'm at, I work in the crypto industry. It's like, okay, cool, I focus on building, and letting like people know what awesome opportunities are out there, so that when the next bull cycle does come, I'm in place to ride that wave.
Yeah, and one of the things that I just so we have a nice spread of optimism, or lack thereof on the state of the macro. The U.S. dollar index, which we did talk about being at 20-year highs, I think June 2002 was the last time that it was this high, and it has been presenting since May a bearish divergence in momentum. Now, I'm not a Forex guy. I'm not an economist. I don't know how much weight something like momentum and RSI has in something like a dollar index, but it is presenting a bearish divergence. It continues to. You're seeing momentum on a downswing at about 7-degree downtrend there, while the value continues to rise at about a 14-degree uptrend. And so it's a pretty notable divergence as well. And I think if it's going to break to the upside, it's probably going to be a big break, though. There'll probably be some kind of drastic news that always tends to accompany these types of events to break through that, to send that pattern higher. And otherwise, I feel like the dollar is kind of presenting a little bit of exhaustion here, even if it is being buoyed by competing fiats, and in particular the euro. And I think that's the thing to watch, though.
What's crazy?
Mm-hmm.
No, what's crazy to me is if you zoom out on the Doxy chart, it's parabolic at this point, right? And that's just not sustainable. I mean, zooming out to the month timeframes, it's definitely pumping hard. And I'm not a forex guy, definitely not a financial expert over here. But I think the danger here for the dollar is um, not just global macro conditions, but also and you've talked about this before, Pap, is where the US itself is coming into potentially big policy shifts with the upcoming election, right? The midterms coming into play. And so I wonder how that's going to affect this big pump that we've been having. Is it going to be that big break to the upside? It's kind of, to be honest, it's just taking a look at this chart. It's kind of hard to see it continue parabolic over here. But hey, it might. Or do you think that policy shifts might cool it off a little bit, Pat?
I I tend to think that there is going to be a point where the Fed's going to look at this. I mean, there are it's not all goodness, right? In having the dollar go parabolic like it is right now. It's also very, very kind of crushing a lot of our supposed allies, right? Because so much of the world's debt, so much of the world's trade is transacted via the dollar, and so this, I suppose, in some ways, if you're an American looking to buy, say a little villa in Europe, okay, sure, you might be kind of happy about things, but in a lot of other ways, it's not great for business. It's not great for economies. It's not great for people to see this.
Well, and it's not even like the dollar's doing great and our buying power is so awesome. We're still experiencing this crazy inflation. I don't know what parts of the country you guys are, but I've traveled around a lot. It seems like no matter where I'm at, you can find places where they can't get people to work. There's like gas stations and McDonald's with $15 hour, in the middle of nowhere offering, and no one's showing up. And like Europe, you looked at the energy prices. I'm seeing reports of people that, they would have had, gosh, it was maybe like between 40 and like 200 pound a month energy bills that are now paying, or, like 1,200 euros a month energy. Like you're seeing ridiculous swings in economies and prices of things. That's going to have big drastic effects. Like I'm seeing like a global economic cool down. It doesn't look, sorry, I know that's kind of that's kind of depressing to put it that way, but I'm not seeing a world where the dollar being up I'm not seeing that realized in somewhere, like even like it's a loss on all ends. Even still, that's the case. And so personally, I think in my gut, what I watch out for is hyperinflation. Yeah. Like, and that's just based on like the old Austrian economics, the tried and true. And, it's, yeah.
Well, that puts the Fed in a tough spot, right? Because if they're trying to cool off demand and as a proxy for that, kind of lower the value of equities, right? The stock market, that's one thing, right? They've signaled, time and again that demand for goods, sure, but the demand for equities right now is a bit too hot, and they're trying to cool that off, right? But the thing is, now we're seeing the dollar pump, and those tend to be what, inversely correlated, is that right? And if that's the case, what do you do? Do you cool off equities? Do you cool off financial demand within the US at the sacrifice of the global macro picture, because the dollar starts pumping again, and all our partners start to experience more economic pain? Or do you balance it? Or do you say the dollar is kind of the primary metric for how we cool off in an inflationary environment? As much as we poke fun at policymakers, they do have a tough job. I think
Well,
that's my point.
I
I do not envy them at all right now.
I come from the camp of the Fed is a bad idea. It was a bad idea to begin with, and like in the long run, it's got an impossible job. It's a theory that what the Fed does can work on a sustainable long term. And again, like Austrian economics, I come from, like central planning cannot work. Give it time, it'll fail, eventually. And we're realizing that failure because what they're doing is chasing the effects of the mistakes from the impossible jobs they've done in the past, and that's going to compound to some point where it breaks. That's what we've seen historically, and it's just math math and reality will assert itself, and it's just a matter of time.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good point. It is a new theory. It is a theory, and maybe it's not relatively new, but in the span of empires, right? It is a new concept, and it is a bit of an experiment, right? And I think it's really interesting that the lessons that are being learned on the fiat side, they are pretty analogous to the lessons that have been learned in crypto and in DeFi. It's just the pace of things moving on the crypto side and the Web3 side, it just happens so much quicker that the lessons are realized, right? Right. The pain is realized and the lessons are learned so much more quickly in the span of months, weeks, maybe even a year at the most, right? Before shifts start and trends happen based on the learnings. And I think it almost looks like we're seeing similar learnings on sustainability and inflation, the revenue focus, all the things that I think are key principles to look for in DeFi projects. I think it's almost looking like the Fed is learning that over the span of decades at this point. It's just unfortunate it takes so long, right? Because there's so much to consider that these policy decisions are made to reduce pain and mitigate the impact of rates and inflation, whereas maybe it needs to be accelerated. So that's just to put that out there. Maybe maybe there isn't enough pain right now when it comes to fiat. That may be an unpopular opinion, though.
Well, that's the thing that like Austrians have been pointing out forever. It's like, look, you can let it collapse now, or you can let it collapse later, but it's gonna collapse, and the longer it takes, the bigger the crash and the worse it's gonna be. Like we can keep trying this experiment, rehashing it, trying it over again. You're just gonna lead to the same result until people give it up. Central planning cannot work. Like, yes, you can have the
Yeah,
theory, but the practice, every time it doesn't work. you know?
and we're now seeing that same central planning kind of supercharged version of that in China. We're starting to see that the cracks in that system, right? And I know we talked about that last week as well, but it does kind of bolster your argument there, Jared. And I think it's really it's kind of ironic that part of Jay Powell's speech was, he reiterated the point that this is painful right now, but it's better to take the pain now, because if we don't, then the pain will be far greater later. And that just echoes exactly what you're saying. So the irony is just,
Well,
it's
see,
massive for me, because they
yeah.
seem to realize it. It's just not on the scale that they need to be seeing it.
Well, I mean, they're bought and sold on this methodology, on this theory. They're not going to have a wake up one day and say, "I'm giving up on the Fed as an idea. This cannot work. I'm bowing out." you know, and largely, I understand. Like, same for society in general. This is the way you've had central planners. They plan your economy, and just most people in general just take it for granted, and they're used to that. They're not rarely even exposed to the ideas of what central planning is, and like how and why it cannot work. You've got there are so many price calculations to make, in an economy, in the free market exchange, that no one nowhere, even if they wanted to do a good job and had, there's no such thing as infinite resources, but even if they wanted to do a good job and had the resources to do it, there's no way that they could calculate the needs and wants of the various people in different places at different times more efficiently than the market can. And the more they do, the more they interfere, the more it disrupts the market signal and just causes this feedback that eventually causes a greater or slower collapse. Now, the idea is, the proposition is like, okay, well, we can kind of taper and control. We can control, like, it's better to have a trickle of pain, is the theory, than just the big crash and then we rebuild. you know um, and so the Austrians would say, look, the crash is coming no matter what. You can draw out the pain, or you can go ahead and rip the band-aid off, for society as a whole. So it's like, do you want to delay it, or you just want to go ahead and get it over with, kind of thing. And that was back when, what people said with like the 2008 bailout, like, what is up with this stuff? This cannot work. You're just gonna cause problems, going down the road. And, is society that much better post bailout? As opposed to letting these
Well,
institutions
so
crash and rebuild.
Yeah, well, I mean, so then I think the question is, you know, what does that look like? What does that rebuild after a crash look like? Or what is what is the admission, the learning today that we can take away with this? Is it are we saying that maybe we should embrace modern monetary theory kind of a thing, or is it a completely different approach that we need? I don't have the answer. I'm just asking.
Yeah, I'm personally I don't agree with MMT. I'm more on the Austrian side of things. So for people that aren't familiar, MMT is this idea that currency only exists through like the issuance of a state. Like that's what money actually is. And they'll go back and that money is always backed by debt. And that's it in a nutshell. I know there's a lot more nuance to it. You can go, search it online if you're curious about more. Um, and so basically what it's saying is that money is debt. And if you want a real thick book on it, you can go look up debt the first 5,000 years. And it's just kind of a historical accounting of making this case. I've listened to the book, an audiobook, still disagree with it. That's not what money is to me. Money is a market function. Debt in this way issued by a state exists at, sorry for being a bit crass, but again, at the barrel of a gun, you're forced to participate with this thing. And to me, like that force comes with an economic consequence. It disrupts trust in society. It increases friction in relationships in a society like that. Like we all resent that we're forced into something or not. And that's gonna have economic consequences versus, no one's got to point a gun to your head to convince you gold has value, and that is an emergent phenomena that arises from market interactions and decisions. And that's not to say like gold is the only money. I'm of a position where I don't care what money you use, have fun using whatever you want, let the market decide what, there's different features we look for in money, fungibility, yada, yada. I'm sure we've gone over that before in the podcast. So that's the differences between the Austrian and the MMT. And we're in MMT world where, money is debt, and that's, the Fed plays that game.
So
Where I'm saying, sorry, go ahead.
no. If you want to finish that, I was going to actually segue. This is good stuff, but I don't want us to get too bogged down on this because there's a lot of interesting things to chat about. And man, I'm not an economist. I'll say at the end of the day, this is definitely way over our heads, right? But I think there's a lot of good points, right? What I wouldn't do is read too far into what we're saying, right? There's a lot of game theory and there's a lot of good ideas here, and or maybe bad ideas. I don't know, right?
Well,
but
I'm not a rich man. How about that for a clue as to whether you should listen to me?
Yeah, but this is good stuff, and maybe one of these episodes we should get dig around. I'm sure there's a few economists hiding in RCC, and so we could game theory this out a little bit. That'd be fun. But something I've been looking at today that I thought was a little lower IQ. I don't know who watched the MTV Video Music Awards. Anyone? No.
Oh yeah, shout out to BTS. They finally won one.
What's funny is I just don't think MTV is super relevant like it used to be. So I did a little bit of a thread on this in the past day, and I was talking about so the news there is that Eminem and Snoop Dogg, they had their music video that appeared to be shot in the other side. They were rocking their Bored Ape avatars, and there's a new category in the VMAs for Metaverse. And there was a few submissions. This wasn't just them. And actually they didn't win, although they were like the highlighted performance and there was a lot of hype around that. Snoop Dogg and Eminem did not win the Metaverse category. Yes, from you guys on who did?
I have no clue. Feed me.
Yeah. Blackpink. Blackpink won. So and I haven't seen the video. I'm going to have to look up and see what video they actually won on. I just thought it was kind of amusing, and saw really mixed opinions in terms of like, did people love or hate the music video from Snoop? And I wasn't blown away. In fact, let me share a link with you guys as you kind of take a peek at it while we're talking. But it was maybe a little bit too on the nose. Like this is a metaverse kind of shill video to me at times. Yeah, here's the link. All right, I'm gonna send this. Oops, send this to you. I did like the intro. You got Snoop sitting there with a blunt that looks like it weighs 50 pounds. It's kind of funny. Excuse me if anyone's sensitive to 420 takes offense to that. Not saying it's good or bad, but it is funny. Yeah, so apparently there were some other nominations though, including Justin Bieber. I had no idea about. And then the other funny thing about this is that there were no blockchain kind of centric performances, right? There was apparently stuff from Minecraft, Roblox, Fortnite, but yeah, from what I'm reading, there was nothing like, we didn't see like Decentraland or Sandbox, for example. Now, I guess other side technically, but other side still very much in a beta state.
Yeah, I did see some in passing, some reports about artists getting a hard time for quote unquote shilling NFTs. I know Bieber was the only name I saw that I recall from the article, just in passing.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, that's not new. But then some celebrities, I mean, they do it to make a quick buck. So others really do get invested. I think we talked about like Val Kilmer last week, and I'm not saying buy his stuff. It probably won't be worth much, honestly. But he has a side project he's put a lot of effort into, and it's very apparent when you look at it, right? Like really high quality art and story and music. And I'm like, cool, man. If you're at a point in your life where you can just kick back, relax, and make some like fun artwork, then why not?
Yes, yeah, I've seen more and more artists like that get into the NFT space. If you're familiar with Mike Shinoda from Linkin Park, like he does NFTs now and has quite a big following.
Oh, that's cool. I was just showing the wife. So the wife didn't grow up with Linkin Park. I was playing some for her last week. I still don't think it's her kind of music, but man, I love it.
Yeah, it's good stuff from our time period.
Okay, boomer. Yeah, so some other funny news too. I don't know if you guys saw this. This has been like a really wild week or two. I think the macro news kind of overshadows everything going on. But Bitboy, so I don't know if you guys knew he was involved in, or is still, I believe, involved in a lawsuit against another influencer that he sued for I don't know if it was like defamation or some like slander and emotional damage. Did you hear about that?
Yes, saw that coming on the radar. From my understanding, this other YouTuber called him Atozi, I believe his name is, and Twitter handle, and made a video kind of calling out how a lot of his recommendations were just overt shills and things like that. And it's like I'm a community manager in a crypto project, and so I get these people all the time and all the channels. Hey, here's our influencer. We can blast your project for this and that and da 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 da. And here's our thing. And I recall like one of Bitboy's like proposals, like, hey, pay me so much and I'll we'll blast your project to the front line and stuff like that. And so I wasn't super surprised to see that kind of criticism come out against him. And and then from my understanding, what happened in the lawsuit is this guy Atozi goes on Twitter, goes to the community and says, hey, this is what's going on. This is what's happening. Of course, the lawsuit is baseless because what I said is honest. And but regardless, if you've ever been sued, like whether you're in the right or not, it's an egregious, stressful, financially, it's financial hell, whether you're in the right or not. And so this guy was out for donations, and a lot of people showed up, donated to him. Kobe being one of those people. I'm not that I'm super familiar with who Kobe is, but I'm familiar with him in like crypto Twitter. And so he donated a good amount from my understanding. And then once Bitboy saw the like backlash, this guy had a big, public following. He did the smarter thing, in my opinion, at that time and said that he would drop the lawsuit. But from my understanding, the filing doesn't go through till today. So, in theory, he has said he will drop the lawsuit. He's doubled down on that a couple times. Guaranteed he'll go forward. Said he absolutely will. So we'll see. By tomorrow, the lawsuit, in theory, should be dropped. But that, in a nutshell, is the drama.
Yeah, I think my favorite part was when Kobe entered the picture. Up until then, it seemed like Bitboy was being pretty gutsy about the whole thing, and then Kobe is probably likely one of the larger crypto whales that's active in social media. I mean, he's been at it for a decade now. He was like, yeah, here's a cool $100,000 to fund. And I guess Bitboy, I'm not wading into the discussion. If you like him, that's cool. If you don't like him, that's cool too. But I guess it was easier for him to do a lawsuit against one guy than half of crypto, and Kobe, because who knows how much Kobe would have kept funding it. I mean, at that point, 100K is probably like pocket change to him, I'm assuming.
Well, and on that, this guy Atozi did, tell everyone as soon as he heard that the lawsuit would be dropped, he vowed to return all the donations. And then Kobe was kind of cool, from my understanding, said like, hey, take the transaction fees out of my 100K and then just send me what's left over. From my understanding, go, check it on Twitter, get the nitty gritty details there in the threads. But a cool situation of, I mean, the crypto community, kind of coming together and, helping out like that. It's yeah, again, I personally haven't gone through all the nitty gritty details of the case and what's gone on, but I know my gut impression of, Bitboy and that stuff and the way this went down. And I'm glad to see the lawsuit coming back. It does seem, yeah, glad to see the lawsuit getting dropped. I'll say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of, we haven't seen much or heard much more on the Tornado Cash developer that was arrested, but I did see some news recently, and this feels very salient after I brought up, my thoughts. We don't need to rehash the whole thing, but how I mentioned that one of my concerns is, though I am a proponent of the decentralized DeFi vision, Satoshi's vision, we have to balance it with national security needs, and that the North Koreans were using Tornado Cash. But as it turns out, this particular developer also may have worked for a Russian security firm that may have been sanctioned even. And so that really does kind of throw into question, while Tornado Cash was widely available for us and it has real quality utility that doesn't involve laundering, was there some other, kind of hidden agenda there for the project?
Yeah, that's fair. Like the people involved in this, who knows their level on that. And it would, at least, I guess there's a part of me it's a bit of relief if this guy was at least involved in something more risky than just being a developer. That's, I know the whole thing's just in but to see that at least he was in theory involved in something sketchy on top. It wasn't just the fact that he was an open source developer and contributed code. If the man just contributed code and wasn't doing shady stuff on the side and is getting arrested, that's absolutely horrible. But at least if he was doing something more risky on top of that, then that's, I guess, the better of the situation.
True. Yeah. There's still a lot to learn about that, though. Just keeping tabs on it. I have to assume there's got to be something more, because if he's still, we're still not seeing many updates, and if he's still under the control of, the Dutch, then I don't know how their legal system works, but I'm more or less very curious that we're just not hearing anything out of him.
Well, and we haven't seen other developers, from my understanding, related to the project get arrested. So that would also lead at least to that conclusion, that it's only the ones who seem to be involved and tied in sketchier things.
Yeah. So you guys, I believe you guys had some topics we wanted to cover. Which how about Jared? You want to go first, sir?
We kind of went over my topics. It was going to be Bitboy and the dollar
Ah,
being at a 20-year high. Yep.
nice. Yeah, yeah. Very exciting topics. All right. Well, in that case, Mister. No, you're not coming through. I don't hear you. Do you hear him, Jared?
I am not hearing the Mister.
Not hearing the Mister. That would explain why you were so quiet in this past segment. So if you can hear me, I'm going to say you
I
are
want
too
some Mr.
quiet.
Mister thoughts on Tornado Cash. From what I'm seeing, he's muted on Reddit.
Muted on Reddit. You
There you
guys
go.
hear
I
me
hear
now?
you. You're coming through.
That
Man.
is so weird.
Actually,
Yeah,
I've had that happen
my
before.
mute button showed. Yeah, I think I was seeing the little green circle on Discord, but I wasn't seeing it on Reddit, even though my mic wasn't. Anyway, um, so yeah, we're talking about our topics, right? I thought,
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting that we're talking about, lawsuits within the crypto industry, and with these, legal actions, the sanctions and the arrests, right? And we got to imagine there's the eventual indictments or the cases brought against folks. That all just kind of like shows me, at least, that we seem to be entering this interesting phase in crypto, right? And maybe it's a factor of the bear market and it's just people kind of being a little bit moody. But it feels like the legal actions, right? Lawsuits seem to be ramping up. And that is something that, we've seen from time to time with rug pulls or exploits, or folks feeling like they've been economically, financially damaged. Maybe it's related to some of the CFI, right, bankruptcies and what have you. And but now we're seeing it more. We're seeing personalities, we're seeing YouTube influencers suing each other, we're seeing really almost kind of these petty, crypto Twitter arguments start to materialize in the court system. And so I thought one thing that was really interesting to kind of like bolster that narrative is the recent report that came out about a certain law firm. What are they? Roche Friedman, a certain law firm that's apparently, you know, partnered up with Ava Labs, right? The folks, the organization behind the Avalanche blockchain, and the report comes out now that makes it sound like, and this is all mostly speculation, right? And maybe I should share a link here, but what the report alleges is that this law firm is working on behalf of Ava Labs to levy lawsuits, to spin up lawsuits, class action lawsuits against other big crypto projects and individuals, even that maybe don't align with the vision and the narrative that the Ava Labs team wants to push. But I think everybody should make their own decision. Like, these are all allegations, and what I took away from one of these articles, and I'll share that again here. What I took away from that is not so much that these allegations are real. I don't put much credence in the allegations until we find proof, because as you read these things, you see a lot of statements and leaps of faith, like seems to be, right? And then they build an entire narrative on top of this bridge that is the seems to be statement, right? They say seems to be this, and if that's the case, then X, Y, and Z. But we still don't know if the seems to be statement is true, right? So I caution everybody to kind of take this with a grain of salt. We are in a bear market, there's a lot of fear out there, and with that's going to come a lot of FUD. So I don't know if this is real. What I took away from this article, though, is we're seeing this one dude who has said on video many times that the, the one way that a lot of participants in the crypto ecosystem, and really when it comes down to it, we're talking about leadership teams and founders. But what we haven't seen until recently is the use of the US legal system, right? The ability to sue and do class action lawsuits. We haven't seen that become weaponized against other projects for one project to potentially get a leg up, right? To get a little bit of an advantage, whether it's by creating FUD around a different project or distracting another project's leadership team with a lawsuit, what have you. I just thought it was really interesting that now there is precedent, and it seems to be at least one law firm that uses the legal system to potentially spread FUD. And that is really interesting where we are in the crypto space, I think. The use of just the legal system to be used as another way to gain a competitive advantage, right? Because until now, really, we've always been talking about the fundamentals of a project and whether they're sustainable and this and that, how to determine what makes a good project and how to help rally the troops and gain awareness for a project. Now we've got this whole other arm, this potentially whole other side of the ecosystem that may start to use legal action to help generate hype around another project or to harm a competitive project. But yeah, I just thought that was really interesting. Have you guys been reading up on the whole Ava Labs and class actions with this Roche Friedman law firm story?
Yeah, I think
I'll share it in the Discord and the Reddit.
I think there's a lot that still needs to come out about that, but honestly, I'm not too shocked. I think if anything, crypto being somewhat unregulated at this point and seeing how communities and participants, investors, traders behave within it, I think you have different communities. You do have kind of that nobler community that believes in the vision or believes and supports the projects and the protocols they participate in, or, they see the goodness in it. But there's a very large vein of extremely greedy, ruthless traders out there. And it includes it the market maker, the institutional, the whale levels, that are going to do anything they can to make money. Absolutely. And until this space, this is where we're going to find that fine line between regulation that can empower and enable the space and integrate it into society better, and regulation that stifles the innovation here and stifles what we're trying to do. But I do think that until we have at least some regulation and oversight, that it's going to kind of continue to see that kind of bad behavior. And maybe I'm being a little bit pessimistic here, but honestly, I mean, that's just been kind of my perception, right?
Yeah, I think you build towards an ideal state. You prepare for not prepare, but you hope for the best, but you prepare for the worst. And that's what we're really talking about here, right? Is you always want to consider what that worst is. And this is part of that worst, right? It's the bad actors. It's the folks that can't fight that powerful urge that is greed, right? The potential to generate X amount of dollars in a windfall versus on the, you're weighing all this money you could potentially make by doing whatever nefarious activity against, what your ethics and your morals might be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's always going to be, you're right, Pap. I think, it's human nature that there's always going to be folks that are going to choose the money hand, right, over the ethics and morals hand.
Yeah. I think over time that it's going to mature, but we're still just kind of at that phase where, and I think it's perfectly reflected in how folks trade meme coins, trade NFTs, is they're looking for, we'll say a quick buck, but I don't say that to kind of imply that it's a bad thing. I was talking with someone else about this past week, and I think what drives people to this point is that we have an entire generation, or really multiple generations now, since the boomers, that have grown up with less and less opportunity, with more and more inequality, and a greater disparity of wealth between the rich and and everyone else. And you have to take every opportunity you can to try to improve that quality of life. I think it's true. You know, the younger generations, for the first time since we've been tracking in modern days, have less, own less, have less wealth than their parents at the same age, and that's not a good thing, right? That kind of sounds like we're moving backwards now.
But I
Yeah, and
think
I
we
think that
all. Oh,
explains
go
a
ahead.
lot of the strife that's out there. Yeah, there's just it's a little bit of the disillusionment with you know, whatever we call the capitalist dream, or right, formerly the American dream, let's call it. And so I think that explains a lot of the strife that's out there, and I wonder if that also explains just this quick, you know, move, or you know, maybe too loose of a standard for what can kick off a lawsuit, right? I think there's just so much. It's a little bit of a disgruntled, what do you call it, user base, and the user base is fiat users, perhaps.
Yeah.
Well, in terms of like the crypto lawsuits, I don't know. Again, like we don't know the truth of the allegations and things like that. Like I guess the claim is that Ava Labs was, you know, has their own little legal team to go out and kind of use that nefariously against competitors, which is kind of done in industry, not to defend it at all, but you get like Samsung and Apple constantly patent trolling each other, you know, and that's quote unquote them doing business, you know, and it's because we have this legal system with all these issues. It is a weapon, you know, it's weaponized like that, and that's unfortunate, you know. Again, if it's true, you know, I you know, again, I hope it stops, and I hope that, you know, they get some feedback about people not being happy about that. Again, caveats, all that, we don't know the actual facts and details and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll watch it over time. But as far as like people getting disillusioned and things like that, it's to me, I ascribe that to like we've had these people pulling the strings, and they've got an impossible job, and they what they do actually makes the economy in the world worse in the long run. And even if they mean well, they, again, from my perspective, it's an impossible job, and that has negative consequences downstream for everybody. It's like the Fed isn't capitalism, it's the opposite of it, it's central planning. You know, and so, and again, like from the capitalist point of view, the central planners, the regulators get in, interfere with the market, and then capitalism gets the blame. And it's like, no, we haven't tried capitalism yet.
So,
True free markets, right?
Yeah. And by that I would mean like true free markets, like the opposite of total central planning. It would be zero central planning.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw, you know, for we talk about Satoshi a lot on here. For those who don't know, there were many players in the early days of Bitcoin, the early days of crypto. But one of the major players who unfortunately passed away, there was a nice post about this on RCC this past week. Hal Finney, he passed away almost 10 years ago. He passed away, I think, like 2013 or 14. But what I always thought was interesting was when you look at what some of the early founders of this space, when they're talking, game theory about where digital currency could go, things it could do. You know, he actually talked about NFTs and crypto art almost, let me see. Yeah, almost 20 years before Bitcoin even existed. So in the early 90s, he was posting on CompuServe. And for those who are younger, CompuServe was one of these, like,
Oh man.
Yeah, so like in the early 90s, these internet companies would pop up that tried to make the internet a little bit easier to use with their browsers, and they would simplify web addresses, and, you know, you use dial-up to connect, like your telephone line. CompuServe was one of those. It was pretty big in the early internet, but you'd have just these text posts like forums that you would post to, very similar to Reddit, honestly. But he was talking about trading, in his words, cryptographic trading cards with different rarities, trying to collect the different art and styles. I just think it's so wild. Some of the directions that these early Bitcoin guys were thinking about, right? Doesn't mean that they were going to necessarily implement it, but we're talking about scaling solutions. He also talked about how effectively layer twos would be required because Bitcoin simply would not be able to transact the entire world's, markets. It wasn't being built for that. It wasn't going to be capable of doing that. And we are seeing these things happen, from 93 and until 2015, 16, somewhere in there when the first NFTs started to kind of spring up in the space. He called that layer twos. He called that. I mean, it's really cool, but it is kind of interesting that these things didn't necessarily grow out of Bitcoin itself. There's a little bit of it, right? We do have Lightning Network. There are some NFTs in Bitcoin, but by and large, it's, on the other chains. What are your guys' thoughts on that? It's gonna be a very divisive topic if you're really, a heavy Bitcoin maxi. And so I'm not trying to incite anything, but it's such an interesting little dynamic that a lot of people kind of gloss over now.
I'm really glad you brought that up because it reminds me of something I've noticed in the industry recently is some Bitcoin OGs going from what I would have thought were diehard maximalists kind of coming back and criticizing the position. And it's very interesting for me to see. Like, I'm seeing a growing portion of the Bitcoin community that is crypto first. They're like, we're in this together against, the nefarious situations of the world. And so, for example, Ragnar Lifthrasser, I forget his Twitter handle, but he's a long time Bitcoin OG. And I believe he's like a core dev, if I recall correctly. But he's been on Twitter, and he's here recently been more and more critical of the maxi position, and talking about these. I think the project he's interested in right now and promoting is chain stacks, but also these things of like building NFT solutions and things like that. And yes, he wants to build it on Bitcoin, but he's also not, spending his time out there like everything that's not in Bitcoin is a scam and fraud and yada, 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 So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It does seem to be like there's a bit of a tide turning in the crowd.
Yeah, I've seen.
Are you saying that's a good thing?
Personally, I absolutely think it is. I think where I start to see different projects, and it's not Bitcoin alone. There's different projects that kind of do this as well, where they'll use the legal system against their competitors, kind of stuff. They'll bally for regulation against and play smear campaigns against their crypto competitor. And from my perspective, like, it's crypto versus the involuntary systems we have, things like that, whether it's corporations or governments that you're more critical of, it's crypto versus that. We're better off together rather than being divided. And the maxi position is too divisive for me. And then again, there's people that are absolute maxis but totally fine with sorry, not absolute maxis, but they're like, hey, I love Bitcoin first and most. I know it's the best. I know it's the greatest. But I don't have any problems with other projects existing, and I don't think they're inherently scams and fraud. So yeah, so I'm glad to see some portion of the Bitcoin community kind of back away from the maximalism and give it some necessary critique.
Yeah, I wish we could break away from the maximalism some days. I understand just kind of human nature. We're kind of tribal. I mean, it's just built into us. It's hardwired into us. It's a survival mechanism. But for the space to grow, to mature, to gain adoption, and if you're just in it to make money or you're in it for the tech, you still need to gain that adoption. Otherwise, I mean, eventually funding dries up, things dry up, interest dries up. I think the maximalism, especially between Bitcoin and ETH camps, is toxic for the space. It really is a turnoff. For example, if I'm following someone, Reddit, Twitter, wherever, and I notice they drop some big, like, really toxic perspective because they're a maximalist, I don't follow them anymore. It's just not, to me, it's not appealing. It's not a sexy look at all. Not in 2022 at least. And
you want to be crypto woke, right?
What's that? Crypto woke, yeah.
That's crypto woke.
You could say that in a way. You could. I mean, I want to see more people enter the space, and I want to see people enjoy participating in the space. As another complaint of mine is a lot of these big accounts, these influencers. Since the bear market's really taken hold, you can tell which ones have made it, because those are the ones that kind of stop posting analysis, commentary, alpha, anything, right? And there, a lot of them have become sometimes funny, but mostly just kind of very ignorant and patronizing, and it gets old after a while, to be honest. You know, this space, it's a tough space to be in. You're on the cutting edge of new technology. You're on the cutting edge of economic game theory. You're on the cutting edge of investing. These a lot of new ideas, but it's stressful to be here. And if you're not contributing in a positive way, why bother contributing, I guess, is my thought.
Yeah, I totally agree, because every time, whether it's this podcast or, community calls that, we do, it's, whenever we talk about why we're here, right? We're in it for the tech, we're in it for, a fairer system. The one thing we always talk about is we're building towards a more accessible, a more just financial future, right? And we're trying to be more inclusive and open up opportunities that have traditionally been kind of gated by the wealth that you currently have today, right? And so, out of to address that whole maximalism narrative, it's kind of weird to me to be fully bought into the idea that we are trying to build towards a better system, and say that out of one side of your mouth, and then out of the other side of your mouth just hurl toxic, FUD, or just keep, non-productive, keep putting non-productive comments out there about how another project is so bad or something. Because
Mm-hmm.
aren't those two things at odds with each other? Aren't we trying to build together and make it better for everyone? Then how
Mm-hmm.
can you go on and out of the other side of your mouth be like, oh, well, but yes, only if you believe in this one token that I just bought, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I totally agree with you, man.
You see it everywhere.
Well,
Yeah. And from
and
an
like I'm not against being passionate about your project at all. I can really respect that. Like, I want to see, like, if I'm gonna believe you more, like, the more passionate you are about your project, that's great. That's wonderful. To me, where, like, it gets to the line of, and at least this is obvious, this is easy to tell, but when they're like, everything that's not this project is a fraud, or this project is inherently wrong because of proof of work or proof of stake or whatever it is. It's versus, uh, I have, if you have so much confidence in your project, go show me, go walk the walk, go out to the marketplace and win. Like, that's great. Like, why make, like, obviously false and spurious statements? Like, it's just, it falls flat on its face that everything that isn't your project is a fraud. And by the way, when you accuse something of fraud and it's not true, you're the one committing fraud.
Yeah, the thing that I think is craziest is it's easy, I guess, maybe it's not easy, but if you're a Bitcoin maxi and we're talking the really hardcore ones that just despise Ethereum, and I'm not saying one or the other is right, but to just completely dismiss everything Ethereum has done and accomplished, and the adoption it's gained, the products it's spawned, I mean, that's silly. I think it's done a lot of what early Bitcoin maxis wanted to do. It's explored a lot of the space that they've wanted to explore. and there's probably a lot of lessons to be learned in technology that could be leveraged to improve other chains. I mean, there's a reason that half of the chains out there are Ethereum clones, right? And that's not to say that Ethereum's perfect, because it's far from it. And even the ETH Foundation, plenty of flaws like every other group and organization in the space. But there's just, I don't know how you could just dismiss it. But the same also in, from the Ethereum camp, dismissing Bitcoin seems silly when it founded this space, it created this space, and its trials and tribulations it had to overcome to let the rest
Poppy,
of the
we lost
space.
you there.
Oh, did we? Did you lose me, mister?
No, I did not.
Okay. Yeah. So anyways, that being said, let's move on. I got one more topic, and then I think and maybe it's time for a Q&A after that. So there's a new trend in NFTs that's actually pretty wild. So, one of the cool things I thought for NFTs is that if you go to mint something, so you have a project, you can set it so at least let's say on OpenSea, if you mint my NFT, cool, I get the money from that initial mint. If you then later resell that NFT, I can get a portion of that secondary sale or a third sale or fourth sale. You can set royalties that you can receive. And to me, this has been one of the big differentiators between just Web 2 digital art and Web 3, is that ability to kind of custom tailor your products, your art, your whatever it is that you're selling on the NFT token, and to continue to get a passive income from it in ways that you can't readily do in Web 2. But there's a rash of recent marketplaces that are not supporting that are cutting out those fees altogether. Now that makes it cheaper for you to buy the NFTs. It doesn't provide any sort of revenue back to the creator. And so this has been a hot topic as well, because I'm of the opinion that without that kind of incentive, what's keeping someone here? I mean, sure, the custody on chain, the ability to track stuff or participating in the space is cool, but from a monetary perspective, from revenue perspective, I mean, they could just go back to Web 2 at that point, because they're just going to make money only from that initial sale, right? I mean, what are your guys' thoughts on this? This is kind of similar too, in a way, to like how reflection taxes work, which, or revenue share within DeFi. There's different ways around this. But in any case, people like passive income. So I don't think that that's necessarily like an evil thing. But people, like I said earlier, people are also very greedy usually. And so if their choice is support the artist or the creator and pay 1, 2, 3, 5, 10%, whatever that person set, or pay 0% and, just the traders keep 100% of the profit. I think most people are going to chase the cheaper option. They want to maximize their profit.
Yeah. So, and I should be more versed on this problem. Like for me, I don't necessarily understand why it's an issue. Like why at the contract level, it can't be enforced and made like mandatory as part of the transfer of the NFT. Or if it has been possible and people just haven't done it, why hasn't it been done? So for me, it's like I'd like to see, in theory, it should be possible to create your NFTs and your smart contracts, surrounding them such that they do respect and enforce the royalty. In which case, that's what I would like to see, because that's been part of the big value proposition and spirit of the NFTs. And I remember like going, to Art Basel and talking to, this is real world artists. About and they were very interested in the value proposition of NFTs, and the royalty was a big deal about that. That was part of why. And so we really need to make that happen if it's not happening and not being respected. And I'm confident that in the long run, that will be the case, because we do realize if you don't respect the royalties, you don't get your NFT market, and that's valuable enough. We've seen it at this point that the solution will be found, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's I think it's definitely it's fair, right? Because creators need to get compensated. And if you look at other models, and you want to draw analogs to existing models, right, it's like micro tipping to streamers or buying subscriptions, right? There are these recurring costs to reward the creator for their time and their creativity, really, right? But I get it because a lot of times these taxes they're abused, right? And the royalties, right? And a lot of times they do enrich a certain set of people. So I gotta wonder, is it a problem with the system, or is it a problem with the market participants and maybe the sophistication level of the retail side,
Well,
because they don't fully understand what they're getting into in the beginning?
I think, if I was going to look at the problem, I think there's two issues. One, it's like you were saying, Jared. There's no, as far as I understand it, and we're talking Ethereum because it is still the primary NFT marketplace, but there's no way currently in the blockchain smart contract or at the blockchain level, I guess, to enforce this. So it's going to be, either your smart contract level, you're going to have to add something to the code, or you can try to blacklist certain marketplaces. That's where I get a little bit fuzzy, but it sounds like there's a technical issue. And then the other part is that, again, the greed aspect. Traders want to maximize profits. For probably 80-90% of people, they're not as concerned about the community or the creator. They're just looking at how much money they can make. And same for these marketplaces. They're draining the OpenSea volume. And again, we know OpenSea is kind of painted as the bad guy, and maybe in some ways they are. But they do respect these royalties, and these new exchanges realize that this is a major advantage they have over OpenSea. So they are all over the place hyping this, no fee, no royalty marketplace to steal that market share. Now, what that could do is maybe convince OpenSea to go the same route. And if OpenSea goes that route, it's kind of like when Apple does something with an iPhone, everyone else starts to follow, like removing the headphone ports. It's not, to me, it's a bad precedent and a bad road that we're going down. I think it's gonna kind of choke some of the life out of the artist community, at least on Ethereum. I can't speak for Tezos, and I don't know how things look on Tezos in terms of this. Maybe there's a similar movement afoot, maybe not. I'll have to look into that, or maybe you can, Jared.
No, I'll report back in more detail next week. But I've seen the conversation come up, and absolutely has been brought up to where a solution will be found, whether it is like more on the social side and like the reputation side of like just not playing with the bad actors, or what. And to me, like, the greater solution is a technical one, to where you can have, like, if I'm an artist and I want to go launch on an NFT marketplace, I'm going to go to the one where my royalty has to be respected. You know, that is something I think there's going to be a technical solution to that. But also, what we're doing is, I'm seeing from the Tesla's community side, we're looking at standards implementation, because what we're also seeing is industry is getting very interested, and we're having conversations with larger businesses, industries, things like that. Like Ubisoft did a big NFT launch with us and things like that. Gap, like, that's more and more that's growing, and they want to see standards. And so, especially around, with regard to these royalties and things like that. So it's going to be, to me, a couple fold solution in terms of like industry standardization, getting the technical problem solved, but also getting the social side of it well, getting people educated as to why they should be interested in this and why they should support this more. Even for the traders in the long run, if you're a long-term trader, it's in your interest for this. If you're just the short term, make a quick buck and do whatever, cool, you're just in it for you, good for you. I also don't care as much about you, no offense, but hey, you're doing the same to me. You really don't care about my interests long term. I don't care about yours long term either. It's just basic reciprocity. But for the people that want to build things better, essentially, we're going to find these longer term solutions. And yeah, I think the alignment of interests are so great. And like, we look at the basic economy, like, you peer to peer, like the business to business economy is orders of magnitude greater, and they're starting to get interested in NFTs, like much more than we saw. It's only growing, and that's going to push
Mhm.
the royalties problem getting solved.
I think, yeah, I think I don't. I think it's far from over, and I could see both sides of the perspective. Of course, I want to make money. I don't want to work my whole life. Crypto's my chance to do that. But as a amateur, pardon language, shit poster and artist, I like to call myself. For probably the past 20 years, I absolutely see the value of Web3 NFT, the NFT space beyond just making money. There is genuine value. There's things that improve on the Web2 formula, and would love to see that gain more traction within the artist community, but I don't think this will do it. So let's move into some Q&A and some of these wonderful comments. I love having the speaker roles. I get the mod privileges, and man, some of the stuff you guys write, even if you're trolling, is just unbelievable. I'd be embarrassed. There's I saw a thing the other day, was like, they were like, is it safe to say this to another person? And the litmus test for that is, would you say it to The Rock, to his face? If you would say it to The Rock, then it's safe to say.
And come on, if you got to ask the question, then the chances of the answer being no, it's not, okay, they're pretty high. If you have to ask the question, just don't say it.
CD and Kevin.
Sorry to be the police here.
No, we've had some really weird comments in the past. CD and Kevin, thanks for clarifying. Yeah, Val Kilmer, for those who wonder why maybe he's spending a little more time in the NFT space, he doesn't really act much now as far as I know. And I didn't know the exact medical reason, but it sounds like he had cancer and his voice is damaged. So I didn't see the new Top Gun, but I know his character at least is referenced in a big way because his character's son is in there. So I was kind of hoping in the previews to like see him on the screen, but I guess maybe that explains why.
Very, very sorry to hear about his cancer. I did not know about that. I've seen him pop up in the NFT sphere and doing those kinds of things. I had no idea that the cancer was a part of that. Very sorry to hear that. I hope he has a good recovery.
Yeah, same. I hope you have a recovery, sir. OK Wonder is asking, hey, this is a good question for you guys. I want to see how you answer. Just tell me how to get rich, please.
Okay, how to get rich. How do you define value? I assume the guy means make a lot of money.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Work. That's how you make a lot of money.
Farm Fiat.
Figure out what that is. Yeah, figure out your greatest skill, what value you can bring to the marketplace, improve on that, rinse and repeat. Mm-hmm. It's the shortcut comes with an equal amount of danger and sketchiness. So that's it. Yeah. Even if you think like, I could trade and flip NFTs and coins and stuff like that, it can be quick, easy, fun hobby in the short term. You want to get good at it long term, you're gonna have to work. You have to put time and effort into getting better and better at it. So yeah, that's how you get rich.
I'll even add to that. Farming Fiat, until you really make it, and by making it, I mean like you genuinely have enough cash saved up to not have to work the rest of your life, right? If you're not to that point, you still need to work. Crypto is a volatile space. As you secure more and more profits, you're going to want to lock those up in more stable, trustworthy investments, right? But if you're going to keep grinding out that fiat, there are a lot of Web3 and blockchain crypto jobs out there. Tons of job boards, probably thousands of jobs, even in this bear market, that you could apply to for any number of things. So you know what? Even if you don't have those kind of skills, you can learn them pretty quick. It's a new space, and the bar for entry is fairly low in a lot of these projects. I mean, just look at how some of them are managed, and yeah,
I can attest to like the opportunities being out there. One of the things to give you a heads up on, there is, if you want to get into the crypto industry, you absolutely can. There's plenty of opportunities out there. I just know in my section of it alone, like I can't come across an organization that's not looking for people. One side of it though, to give you expectations, is either unless you have some pre-existing skill, like you're a social media manager or something like that, or if you're a dev, of course everybody's wants to get you into their project. But you might have to take a passion pay cut. I mean, it's crypto and people work for passion. And that's not across the board. That's kind of a general thing. If you don't have experience, especially if you're a less experienced dev and you want to get into the industry, expect to get maybe a bit of a lower offer than you might find elsewhere. But part of that becomes like, if you're working in crypto, you're getting more value than just your paycheck. For a lot of people, there's a meaningful aspect to it. There's a moral aspect to it. There's a satisfaction of what you're contributing to at the end of the day. And that's the consequence of that is that, there's going to be other people who are willing to work for less. And so the market, that's where the market's going to set the price. And don't get me wrong, there's plenty of great jobs out there that if you're a very experienced dev and you want to get into crypto and stuff like that, you can absolutely find opportunities that will pay as good, if not far better than you can find in the rest of the marketplace. But I would say, and on top of this, there are great opportunities to moonlight and just pick it up as a hobby. To help out and just get your foot in the door. You'll get exposed to more things and be that enthusiastic person that's like, yeah, I'll take on that. I'll do that. And you'll find soon enough, you are getting offered more money, you're offered more responsibility, and you're building a career within crypto. So that would be my thing. There's absolutely plenty of opportunity to work in the industry. It's far better than, good grief, like 2014, 2015, 2016, like those roles were coveted and it's hard to find. Now it is not. You want to get into the crypto industry? Come on in.
Yeah. Speaking of Mr. That's what he does. Now he had to drop, but he quit Silicon Valley to go into DeFi, into crypto. So, if anyone has questions and curious about what it's like to work in the space, feel free to message him, and I'm just going to volunteer him. I'm sure he'd be happy to talk about it. But you can easily Google these job boards. There is a ton, and not just that, but bounties also. Even for some of the projects I assist with, you do these bounties to get help with small things. Because the nice thing about working in crypto is usually you have, some discretionary funds in the form of whatever tokens you've collected. For example, all my bananas, many, many bananas, and not much to do with them. Let's see.
You can hold and appreciate them.
I do love my bananas. How would I regulate cryptocurrencies? There's no way we could give a really comprehensive answer on that, but I would say that a few of the areas I would want to see a little bit of clarity, not even just the regulation, but just some clarity to help us manage our expectations, things like tax laws and having more accommodating tax laws and then having even a tax-free benefit for transactions under a certain value, which would encourage people to use it more as an actual transactional currency versus just hodling. I think that would be a start. And also some form of adoption integration into the existing monetary systems. How that would look, I don't know, but it'd be great if there was like a formal linkage, I guess, between, say, the fiat currency and Swift and blockchain and all these other things, right? Which I guess is going into the central bank digital currency topic, and some have mixed opinions on that, but I think it's inevitable because there are many benefits to a government to go that direction. But yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Jared. It's kind of like a hard question because there's just, again, we're not economists, we're not regulators, we're not legal professionals, so that's a big question.
I'm a dude with opinions. I got those.
Yeah.
As far as like what I would like to see regulation wise is, for one, regulate thyself first. Go clean up your act before coming to crypto. like the SEC's, like the pre-existing laws, that they're way obscenely outdated. So a lot of what's already there needs to be gutted, corrected, clarified. So it's like, start there before you start worrying about crypto. Clean thine own house first, then come, let's talk to crypto and have it as a conversation. How can we work together? Don't show up and say like the conversation is a formality, because if you don't do what I want, I'm pointing the gun at you. you know that's the way. That's, hey, my ideal world, not going to happen, but that's what I'd like to see regulation wise. And I think if you worked that way, you could see crypto industry and projects working with states and governments instead of working against them. Because the value proposition of crypto, I know it's not comfortable to talk about, say, is the opportunity for them to exist and transact whether governments want them to or not. Regulation resistance is the ultimate value proposition of crypto. That's why it was, that's the inception. That's the whole purpose of it. Uh, and so I think there can be cooperation there. I mean, it's unlikely given the alignment of interests and all that, but that's, ideally, that's what I'd like to see is the regulators take that path to it.
Yeah. I think in any case, and I probably will get a little bit of hate for this, but I just want to see some positive regulation, modern regulation. Like you're saying, a lot of that stuff's just so dated and it's not built for the type of technology that blockchain cryptocurrency is built on. I apologize, I can't say your name, but your name's like dot heart star heart dot. They're asking about NFTs as a store of value and what devs do to ensure that it's not just a money laundering scheme. This is a funny topic because this is one of the big accusations of NFTs, that they're a big scam, that they're a pyramid scheme, that they're a Ponzi, that they're money laundering. And you know what? Sometimes that's true. Same for crypto, same for any sort of investment. There's always shady stuff happening. Even the traditional art world is plagued by, everyone jokes about it, the money laundering, like people spending $30 million for a 10 meter by 10 meter painting of just a red dot or something. Now, I'm not saying that that's not artistic. If you find an artistic merit in that, then I respect that. But there's absolutely people that, kind of use it for illicit purposes. That being said, there's a couple of things you can check to see that you're investing in something. If you're only concerned about value, look for artists or creators, depending on what type of NFT it is. Look for folks that come from an established background. For example, with Moonbirds, you had the creators coming from, they were well known in the Web 2 space, and they had a lot of venture capitalists backing them. Number two is VCs. Now, I'm not a fan of VC-backed projects because VCs do tend to dump on investors, like we saw with Solana, for example. But VCs also will give a project more scrutiny because obviously they're gambling their own money, right? They need to see returns on their investment. So they're going to scrutinize the books more. They're going to know the team doxed, most likely, right? They're going to know who they're actually working with. And so if you see some big VC backing, that's often, not always, but often a sign that at least the team's not going to rug pull.
I can't these days. Like, I used to rely on that kind of like, indicator. But after this last like crash with, blockchain.com, which used to have a great reputation to me, like throwing 270 million to Three Arrows Capital. And like, I can't trust that the VCs are acting competently or even with their own money at this point.
Yeah. And this is about lowering the risk of your investment. This isn't to say that it's
that's fair.
The guarantee, right? Because nothing really is. And I would say the other thing is just to look at the community. I don't really sell NFTs. I think maybe I sold one NFT ever, but I do have a very large portfolio of them. Again, going back to what I said earlier, I come from a little bit of an artsy background. I love the communities. The ones that I invest in and participate in usually are because I have fun with them, because I enjoy the art, or some combination of the two, right? So if you have an active community and people look like they're happy, even if the market's down, and if the team's engaging positively, these are all good signs. That's not a guarantee, but it is a good sign. Now, if you're looking at a project that hasn't updated Twitter in 3 weeks or 3 months, or maybe once a week, if you don't really hear much out of them, I would avoid it. So, anyways, those are my thoughts on the NFT space. I mean, that's a whole separate topic, but yeah. Let's see what else we have. Yeah, see, we have the ongoing discussion about regulation, decentralization. I don't disagree. There's always that thread of crypto, the cypherpunk, the kind of against the man, against traditional monetary financial systems that I madly respect. I just, for the average person, I don't think that strictly decentralized, off the grid approach and evading regulatory oversight is going to be what they need right now. And there's certainly cases where I'll be wrong. There's countries where I'll be wrong. If you're in an oppressive government that monitors everything you do and you're just, say, trying to escape to a better quality of life, then you probably want something like Monero that can't be tracked. But if you're, say, an average middle-class person in the U.S. and you want access or some exposure to advanced financial services like in DeFi that your bank simply doesn't offer, but you're willing to KYC, maybe that's more along the lines of what you need. And I suspect a lot of the folks listening are going to fall into that camp. But, not to be dismissive of the other camp, because that's a real need right now. Like people trying to, say, escape North Korea. Maybe if they have access to some crypto, they could pay off someone to help them get out. I don't know. That's just, just a thought. Right.
Yeah, with time, like we've seen it historically, the experiment of state-ran monies always collapse. And, crypto is a proposition of a money that could outlive states and be independent of them.
That's true. And you know what? If we ever get to that point where even if the regulations come, let's say Bitcoin continues to exist as it does, they can't change the chain. Or let's say they never try to change the chain, but they do say, hey, you as a citizen, if you do these things, you have to report it and you have to pay tax on it and you can't do these things with it. And maybe you comply. But, like you're saying, Jared, maybe eventually over time, it is kind of the destiny of fiat currencies to kind of die in some form or fashion. And, maybe blockchains are in a way eternal. That's, as long as they have enough people supporting the chain, if it's proof of work, proof of stake, or whatever, something in between, it's always going to be there.
Yeah, well, and like the best predictor of future behavior is relevant past behavior. And historically, like fiat currencies don't, and they are an experiment. And they don't last. Like one collapses and then another one pops up, but crypto is a new element to that game. It's a new experiment, and I absolutely admit and agree that it is an experiment. And on top of that, like you're absolutely right that regardless of what opportunities there are with or without crypto, governments are going to be able to, control their citizens, regulate their citizens, regardless of crypto, and people will or will not comply with that. Or maybe they can use their legal institutions within their countries to make the environment more accommodating to crypto. Ideally that'd be, the nice thing to see, is that through the legitimate process, the economies become more friendly to crypto. And then I think what we're going to see is eventually like different states competing for the crypto industry with their regulation. And that's a great thing to see. when states have to compete for, you know, citizens and businesses and economies, that's great.
Yeah. Agree with you on that one. And I'm just thinking as a kind of a final thought, I think we've hit all the questions. But I don't know who else is taking ownership of their Reddit NFTs. Maybe there's another name for it. But so my profile picture is ugly as sin on here now, and it's this is what Reddit gave to me. I don't know if everyone gets like a similar one, but I like hit the thing and I opened it up and it gave me this ugly freaking blobfish, I guess is what it is. I have to imagine I have the ugliest Reddit avatar in existence. So
Yeah, I can attest to that. That's pretty hideous, my friend.
I got such a kick out of it though when I cracked that. I was like, oh, okay. Because someone said, I don't know if he was talking to you or me or Mister, but he was like, you don't sound anything like your profile picture, and I'm glad I don't.
I mean, your profile picture looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, probably something like that, or even more gross and disgusting. Yeah. So I think that's going to wrap it up for this week. Yeah, it's been great. No more questions. Appreciate the feedback and the commentary as always, though, and great having you on, Jared. So hope everyone has a great week.
Thank you so very, very much, and everybody else, thank you so much for joining us.
Yep. Have a good one, everyone. 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 Everyone.